In June 1940, Winston Churchill made this grim prediction.
I expect that the Battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Upon it depends our own British life and the long continuity of our institutions and our empire.
It would become the most decisive battle in British history, and this is the story of how it was won. In this series, 4 young pilots have competed for the chance to go through the very same period of training that a Spitfire pilot might have had during the Battle of Britain, 1940. After 2 weeks, it was Dave Mallon from Manchester who came through, thanks to the natural feel for the aircraft that gave him the edge over more experienced pilots. His prize is 9 hours combat training in this real World War II Spitfire. Owned by pilot Carolyn Grace, it was built as a single-seater fighter in 1944, flying over 170 combat missions, from D-Day right to the end of the war. In the late 40s, it was converted into a 2-seater trainer. As Dave goes through the final stages of his training, this program tells the story of the day that was to help settle the outcome of the battle, September 15th. But also the horrific price paid by so many pilots in helping win the Battle of Britain. Dave embarked on his training by flying the same aircraft as his 1940 predecessors would have done, the Tiger Moth. He then graduated to the Spitfire, where pilot Carolyn Grace instructed him in the basics: straight and level flight, tight turns, and how to recover from engine failure.
You had patrol? I had patrol. You had patrol.
With all this under his belt, Dave moved on to navigation, flying all the way to the south coast, across the skies where Battle of Britain fighting was at its most intense. Then came close formation flying, learning the art of being a wingman. Dave will now move on to the advanced flying a Spitfire Ace would have needed. His instructor will be Peter Kinsey, a world-class aerobatics expert and the pilot in charge of the Imperial War Museum's historic flying collection. Few people know more about flying the Spitfire than he does.
Aerobatic flying is quite important if you're going to be a fighter pilot in combat. You are going to be flying the aeroplane quite close to its limits of high speed and low speed. You're going to be flying in very unusual attitudes, upside down one moment, in negative G one moment, hanging from the straps, the next minute being squashed into your seat. Aerobatic flying gets you used to that kind of thing, and you'd have to be thinking very fast. So it's a good experience to get you into the kind of manoeuvring you'd be doing in combat.
Had Dave been flying in September 1940, he would have needed all these skills and more. The Battle of Britain was entering its final and deadliest phase. Through August, the Luftwaffe had been concentrating its fire on fighter command, bombing its airfields and shooting down its planes. The RAF was managing to hang on, just, but relentless attacks were taking a terrible toll in lives and in morale. It wasn't clear how much longer they could last. Outdated British tactics had meant grievous losses, especially among replacement pilots who had no experience of modern dogfighting. They had been decimated. But on September the 7th, the whole face of the battle changed. Instead of pressing home their attacks on the RAF's beleaguered infrastructure, the Germans switched their attention to London. It was a monumental mistake. It unleashed terrible suffering on the city's population, but offered the RAF a vital moment of respite from their daily battering. It let them draw breath, regroup, and rethink their tactics. The Luftwaffe had another problem: time. It was running out. Hitler had given them till the middle of September to convince him it was safe to invade Britain. So Goering drew up plans for waves of massive attacks scheduled for September the 15th. This would be the day the RAF would finally be destroyed, clearing the way for the invasion barges. The 15th of September was to be Goering's day of destiny. At around 8 a.m, Keith Park, commander of 11 Group, responsible for the defence of the southeast of Britain, arrived at his base deep beneath the ground at Uxbridge. This was his centre of operations, from which he coordinated his squadrons. The German plan was for two major operations, one in the morning and then an even larger one in the afternoon, designed to catch the RAF recuperating from the first one. As Park was arriving at his control room, German bombers were already preparing to take off from their French bases, as German bomber pilot Ernie Wedding recalls.
And that was the biggest onslaught Luftwaffe delivered to the RAF. And as it so happened, I had to fly to North Field. And it was the first time that I did a low-level attack on an airfield.
As if he wasn't under enough pressure, Park looked up at 11 o'clock to see a very important guest arriving, Winston Churchill, taking a grandstand seat for the day's unfolding events. Four minutes later, the radar stations picked up the first of the incoming raiders. Their bearings, numbers and altitude were recorded by the teams of plotters armed with their croupier sticks. At 11:15, Park was still undecided whether this was a genuine raid or simply a diversion designed to lure him into scrambling too many planes too early. It took Park 10 minutes to satisfy himself this wasn't a fake raid, and he immediately scrambled his first squadrons. The Germans were putting all their faith in the power of their numbers to overwhelm Fighter Command. But they had a shock waiting for them. The RAF had some pretty big numbers of their own, and at 11:25, they were unleashed. 5 squadrons of Hurricanes and Spitfires took off from their bases north of London and joined up into one mass formation. This was the so-called Big Wing, a strategy that broke with RAF custom by making squadrons fight together, not separately. It took time to assemble so large a group of planes, but today the RAF was lucky. Unexpected headwinds had slowed a squadron of incoming German bombers by over an hour, at a stroke overcoming the strategy's major disadvantage, the time it took to implement. At around 10 to noon, the two formations met head-on, over 50 Hurricanes and Spitfires attacking all at once, picking up where the Hurricanes of 256 Squadron had just left off.
It says here I shot down a Ju-88 and also shot down Dornier 17. Dornier 17 became a nuisance because he put a lot of bullet holes, his gunner, into my aircraft and severed one of the aileron cables. And I never thought I'd have the guts to bail out of an aircraft. It's a long way down. But I was halfway out before I could stop myself and realised I still had a bit of control over the aircraft. And so I sat back down in the cockpit again, and I managed to successfully get it back to Biggin Hill.
As the morning fighting ended, the RAF claimed 81 kills, 26 from the Big Wing alone. In fact, German losses were only a quarter of this figure. With so many planes engaged, confusion was rife. The real damage was psychological. The RAF appeared stronger than ever. It was a devastating revelation to those German planes limping home to their bases in France. Once a pilot got into combat, it was every man for himself, no matter what size the formation he was flying with. He required razor-sharp reflexes and the total mastery of the aircraft's maneuverability. It's time for Dave to start learning the art of aerobatic flying.
Bring the tail up a little bit just to get that reference mark on the cowling on the horizon.
Okay.
F +6. And then just wait for it to fly itself off, which is about 70 knots it will do. Now
Okay.
apply the brake, select the gear up. When you're ready, you have control.
Okay, I have control. And then tell me when I'm at my right angle.
I would say it's a perfect angle there, yeah, spot on, and then round the right. Excellent, perfect, yeah, really good.
That feels so nice.
He is discovering what generations of Spitfire pilots had learnt before him, that it takes only the tiniest tweaks of the control column, rudder pedals and throttle to throw the aircraft round the sky. He may not be firing any guns, but he is getting to experience firsthand just what made this plane so special to so many RAF pilots.
Good, that looks like a pretty good heading, no traffic ahead or any around or nobody above us.
Okay, accelerate, and a little bit of right rudder as we go into
A little
the...
bit of right rudder if you get near the top of the loop, inverted, yeah, just a little squeeze of right rudder.
Okay.
Really gentle pull up.
Every fighter pilot will tell you, never ever fly straight and level in a combat area. Great advice, so long as you know how to turn it into
Here we
practice.
start to increase the back pressure. Looking over our head toward the right. Yeah.
In fact, the aerobatics expert could be just as vulnerable as the novices, though for different reasons.
They were too precise in their flying, and they also had trouble and were shot down, because the less straight lines you flew and the less accurate your turns were, the less chance you had of being hit by an enemy aircraft.
But it's only the pilot who has mastered them who can then go on to fly dogfight style. Peter Kinsey is teaching Dave how to extract every last ounce of performance from the Spitfire, to make him feel 100% in control of a fighter designed to fly at the cutting edge of World War II technology. These are the skills that just might give him a better than 50-50 chance of surviving his first missions.
It's all new to me. I felt I'll cope quite well with them. Pulling G in this aircraft is quite different as well, because it seems to last forever when you're pulling and pulling. It's not an immense amount at the moment, but it just goes on forever and ever, and it's really quite tiring. At the end of the day now, I'm completely knackered now. Really, I'm tired.
I've been quite amazed at how well Dave's done, because before today I didn't know what to expect and what he'd done so far. But the first trip just told me he's got a good natural feel for the airplane, and he's not just flying it mechanically the way he's been told to do it. He does something, and if he makes a mistake, he immediately recognises it and tells you what the mistake was, and then next time he doesn't make it. So I've been really impressed.
But Pete can only teach Dave so much. Like every other fighter pilot, he will have to work out for himself what it takes to stay alive.
The reason I'm still alive was luck, basically.
Everybody knew Bob Dole was good. Even Bob Dole knew he was good. He was always in the thick of it, somehow. Pilots were like that. Some never saw the enemy, others couldn't shake them off.
I should have been killed on my first sortie. When I wasn't killed, it gave me the opportunity to think out what I had to do to both stay alive and shoot other people down.
It was the pilots like Bob Dole that it was second nature. He flew, his eyes were everywhere.
It was soon clear that September 15th was going to be a big day for Fighter Command. All over the southeast, pilots were struggling to get into the air as fast as possible, even those who didn't have aircraft of their own.
My aircraft was non-operational, and when the scramble was announced, I had no aircraft from my squadron available. So I ran to 41 Squadron dispersal and managed to get into one of their aircraft and took off and flew as a pair with one of their sergeant pilots.
With over 250 Hurricanes and Spitfires in the air, the RAF actually outnumbered the Luftwaffe, though nobody realised it at the time. That didn't stop RAF pilots dying and planes falling out of the sky.
We were flying as a pair, and he was watching out on his side and I was watching out on my side, and next time I looked around, he'd gone and there was a 109 in his place. I think the 109 actually shot him down, and it didn't go for me, but then I peeled off, and I can't remember what went on after that, but then I got hacked down later on and lost his aircraft, his squadron aircraft for them as well.
Ian Hutchinson wasn't alone. 2 Hurricanes had already been shot down during the first battles of the morning, killing both pilots. 100 German bombers reached London as Big Ben struck noon. At around 12:30, 2 further Hurricanes were also destroyed, one exploding in mid-air, the other one diving straight into a house in South London. At last, the morning's fighting was over. The Germans returned to their bases in France, minus 18 of their bombers and 12 of their fighters. Fighter Command lost 13 aircraft, with 7 pilots killed. The British public was settling down to their Sunday lunch. Dave Mallon is now ready to move on to even more complex aerobatic manoeuvres. Peter Kinsey is going to talk him through 2 of them. First, the aileron roll, turning the plane onto its back, twisting through 360 degrees before levelling off again. And then the classic loop, the plane flying through a huge vertical circle.
Okay, what speed again? 250?
220 you'll do for the aileron roll.
Gentle one.
Aileron roll, yeah.
So aileron roll now?
Aileron roll.
Okay.
Yeah, here we go. Yeah, that's much better, isn't it? Right. Righty-ho, well, what we'll do is we'll do a climbing turn to the left now, get a bit of height back on again.
Okay, yeah.
And then we'll try a loop. That was great. That aileron roll was really good.
Okay, so accelerate from 250.
We'll do it 270. Go for 270.
270.
Yeah. A nice gentle pull-up.
The importance of this kind of flying agility became more and more apparent as the Battle of Britain progressed. Shooting down aircraft, as opposed to merely flying your own, demanded ruthless precision.
The best from underneath, if you can manage it. And that needs a little bit of aerobatic flying to do it up. If you do it from underneath, nobody's going to be shooting at you, so you can get as close as you can. But on the other hand, you've got to get underneath until your target is behind you, and then pull up while he's getting on top of you, and then turn over 180 degrees while he's going ahead of you, and then pull up and aim in front of him to make your attack. So it's you've got to be a pretty good pilot to do a useful head-on attack.
Some of them would come with 5 or 6 hours duration on Spitfires. All they could do was take off and land, and probably a few side slips and tight turns, but they were thrown in at the deep end. But a fighter pilot in action, he's not only got to fly that damned aeroplane and watch his speed and watch his fuel gauge and watch what's happening outside and what's coming from above, what's coming from below, look in his rear mirror, what's behind. He's flummoxed, confused utterly, But it's only by doing all that you can get experience if you live long enough. But some of the poor devils didn't. And it was sad, really sad.
At 1:45 on the afternoon of September the 15th, British radar picked up the second German attack. 475 enemy aircraft heading for the London docks. At 2 p.m, 2 waves of German bombers crossed the coast at Dungeness. Between 2:05 and 2:30, Keith Park scrambled 276 Spitfires and Hurricanes to defend the capital. This time they were facing a German force twice the size of the morning one.
There's a famous incident reported by Churchill in some detail when he visited Park on September the 15th. It wasn't the first time he'd done so. And he watched all the orders going out, he saw all the squadrons taking off, and then he uttered to Park the words that he'd uttered to General Gamelin in France, "Where is the reserve?" And when he'd uttered those words to Gamelin, he'd been told that there was no reserve, and he realised that France was done for. Well, now he asked Park, "Where is the reserve?" And got the reply, "There is none, sir." Churchill looked very grave, as he reports at that point.
Commander of 11 Group, Keith Park, had committed every plane at his disposal. In the skies above his underground bunker, nearly 1,000 planes, British and German, were locked in combat. But the RAF, steeled by weeks of fighting, was starting to inflict losses of their own.
Well, the 15th of September was rather a special day. Everything went my way, and I was finally credited with 1 Dornier destroyed, 2 109s destroyed, and 1 Dornier shed. So that was 3.5 aircraft. I found myself behind a Dornier 215, I think it was, and I was firing at it, and suddenly the crew bailed out. And I was so close behind it that 2 of the bodies came out and nearly hit me. He came so close that I ducked. I remember ducking in the airplane, thinking, my God, he's going to hit me.
They never saw me, and I was right behind them, and they were both sitting ducks. I mean, and I just went up behind them and shot the first one down, the leader, and the other one, for some unknown reason, never took any evasive action at all. He must have been a very young, inexperienced, and so I shot him down. You couldn't feel sympathy for them. I mean, you didn't try and kill them. You just tried to disable the aeroplane, was the main thing. With the twin-engine thing, you always aimed at the engines first.
Not every RAF pilot got to fly that day. There were many out of action, injured or wounded. One such was Nigel Rose.
15th September 1940. Dear Mum and Dad, for the past 4 days I've been leading a life of leisure and boredom since I foolishly let my Spit be riddled by an ME-110 on Thursday, and I got a slight wound on the left elbow into the bargain. It's rather like a small gunshot abrasion and doesn't hurt a bit. But I carry the limb about in a sling so that it'll get a chance to heal quickly, and the wounded soldier effect is terrific. I hope all goes well with you and that you haven't had too much of this bombing business. Love as always, Nigel.
His wound cost him a few days of pain and discomfort, but he was lucky. All around him were men in much worse state than him, none more so than those burned inside their flaming cockpits.
It was their face and their hands that got burned, and that was this extraordinary pattern of injury which was reproduced time and time again through that summer, which became known as the airman's burn.
Only days earlier, Spitfire pilot Richard Hillary had been shot down in flames. He would later describe the experience in his celebrated book, The Last Enemy, from which he recorded extracts later in the war.
I felt a terrific explosion which knocked the control stick from my hand, and the whole machine quivered like a stricken animal. In a second, the cockpit was a mass of flame. I reached up to open the hood. It wouldn't move. I tore off my straps and managed to force it back. But this took time, and when I dropped back into the seat and reached for the stick in an effort to turn the plane onto its back, the heat was so intense that I could feel myself going. I remember thinking, so this is it. and putting both my hands up to my eyes. Then I passed out.
I was flying with him at the time when he got shot down, and he landed in the Thames, and we never saw him again because he went to Ravensbourne Hospital and he was there for 8 months getting his eyelids grafted back. He was very, very badly burned, and he was a very good-looking boy.
Hillary's salvation, as with so many other injured pilots, would be the legendary plastic surgeon Archibald McIndoe. He helped pioneer new techniques for dealing with the kinds of appalling injuries pilots could suffer, becoming a hero to his patients in the process. His hospital in East Grinstead became home to scores of burned pilots. The men under his care christened themselves the guinea pigs.
The 47-year-old plastic surgeon, Mac to his patients, made the club possible. Demanding an entrance fee no one would like to pay. The guinea pigs today number more than 600.
If the nose has been burnt off, they used to cut a lump of skin out of your forehead, flap it down, leaving it attached, and stitch it around the nose. And that is called a pedicle. And they used to have to stay like that until it had taken root on the nose. And then they could cut off the top bit and carry on.
We drove to East Grinstead, and I certainly was not prepared for what I was about to see, which was raw flesh, raw face, no eyelids, no lips, fingers burnt away. It was just raw flesh. I thought, oh my God, what have I let myself in for? However, we crammed as many as we could in the car. Well, I did. And we went to a local pub. It was a revelation. Everybody in the pub clapped them on the back, said, come on, old boy, have a drink. If they couldn't drink, they gave them straws to drink through. They treated them exactly as if they were normal people, which they weren't.
This big blonde barmaid used to come round the bar, put her arm round everyone in turn and give them a kiss. That woman deserved a medal if anyone did.
I went home to my mother, burst into tears. I said, I can't do that again. She said, you bloody will. We wouldn't still be here if it wasn't for those boys. And she was right. From that moment on, I was fine.
Rudder and into a spin, pull out.
There are only a few of McIndoe's guinea pigs left today. One of them is Bill Foxley.
The Guinea Pig Club have an anthem, which we sing at our reunion each year, and the first verse goes like this. We are McIndoe's army, we are his guinea pigs, with dermatones and pedicles, glass eyes, false teeth and wigs. And when we get our discharge, we'll shout with all our might, per ardua ad astra, we would rather drink than fight.
Despite some successes in the morning, September the 15th wasn't going all the RAF's way. Around 3 o'clock, there was a second attempt at a big wing attack, this time with far less decisive results. As critics of the tactic had warned, British planes got in each other's way. The Germans, led by their top-scoring ace, Adolf Galland, made short work of 4 RAF fighters shot down in minutes. The final one was Galland's 33rd victory. But among the chaos of the day's fighting, there were 2 extraordinary episodes that stuck out. Both were to symbolize the kind of determination that helped make the RAF the force it had become. Hurricane pilot Ray Holmes chased a lone German bomber right over the centre of London. He had run out of ammunition, but refused to break off. What happened next made Battle of Britain history.
I knew now that the only way of getting this chap down was to take his tailplane off. His tailplane was looking so fragile there, and to me it looked like a model aeroplane, as if you could just chop it. And I thought my wing at that speed would go right through his tail and take the tail off. Instead of taking the piece of the tail off that I wanted to take off, It took the whole of the twin tail section.
Amazingly, the whole event was caught on film.
This is the Dornier coming down. This is the fuselage with the wingtips missing and the tail missing. And this is the tail. And they both came down together and landed on Victoria Station.
Ray Holmes managed to bail out and survive his encounter. But later that afternoon, another RAF pilot performing a similar feat of lonely heroism was less fortunate.
When we landed at Rochford, we had 3 pilots missing. And one of them was Peter. Now you're bringing back memories.
Peter Pease was Richard Hillary's closest friend on 603 Squadron and represented, I suppose, the golden youth of the British aristocracy. He was 6'3", blonde, handsome, and a devout Christian. And Hillary reports a conversation that he had with Pease after he had made some rather cynical remarks about the war and why they were fighting, in which Pease suddenly launched off to explain to Hillary the necessity of standing up to the Nazis, and how, if they failed, everything good and true and beautiful in the world would be annulled, and that it was for deep moral reasons that the Nazis had to be fought.
Peter Pease did a head-on attack with a Heinkel 111. And the front gunner of the Heinkel 111 got him.
One of the Germans saw a lone Spitfire suddenly dive through the clouds in front and head straight for his formation in a head-on attack, the most dangerous type of attack that you could make. It was by itself. It started opening fire, and then he noticed that there was a 109 on its tail, and the 109 opened fire on the Spitfire. To his astonishment, the Spitfire took no evasive action. It didn't try to dive away or to circle or to break off the attack, but ignored the fire from behind it and carried on straight into the formation of Heinkels, firing its guns all the time until it went through the formation. He reports turned over on its back, starting to smoke, and dived away, where it eventually crashed. And that, it turns out, was Peter Pease, carrying out a more or less suicidal lone attack on a large formation of bombers, all alone, with a 109 on his tail that he decided to ignore.
By the end of September the 15th, the Germans had flown 1,300 sorties, the British just over 1,000. The day's engagements had taken the RAF and the Luftwaffe to their very limits. Now all that remained to do was decide who had won. Britain woke up the next day to screaming headlines. 185 German planes destroyed, the Luftwaffe routed, the RAF triumphant. The Germans retaliated with their own equally inflated figures. The genuine numbers were 56 German aircraft destroyed versus 28 RAF. It wasn't Fighter Command's biggest tally of the battle, but it was their most significant. The ratio of 2 to 1 tells its own story. The Luftwaffe weren't even close.
The real significance of September the 15th is that it was a psychological turning point, because it finally revealed to everybody, particularly the decision makers on both sides, what had been going on for the previous 2 or 3 weeks, which was that the Luftwaffe had been getting nowhere.
Hitler could see it, even if Goering could not. 2 days later, he shelved his invasion plans. Though Churchill wouldn't know it for some time yet, his great gamble had paid off. The RAF had saved Britain from the fate suffered by Poland, France, and the Low Countries. Sporadic dogfights would continue, but by the end of October, even these had petered out. The Battle of Britain was over.
We stopped them from achieving their aim. That was what was in our mind. stop them from getting air superiority so that they could have brought their invasion barges under cover of the Luftwaffe across the Channel.
The Germans lost 500 of their fighter pilots. They also lost about getting on for 2,000 of their bomber crews, because when you shot down a bomber, you shot down 4 people, of course. And they simply ran out of people.
It really ranks with the Armada and whatever you like, Agincourt and so on, the victories of the few against the many.
The Battle of Britain, from our side, it was a complete waste of time. Because they fell into the trap what Churchill said. For the RAF, it was a victory.
For the Luftwaffe, the battle had ended in tactical withdrawal rather than annihilation. So not all of them share this view it was an RAF victory.
When people ask me why the Luftwaffe lost the Battle of Britain, I have to reject the question. I don't consider that Germany lost the battle. I think the end result was neutral. Nobody won.
The figures say otherwise. 4 months of fighting had cost the Luftwaffe nearly twice the number of aircraft lost by the RAF. It was a decisive margin.
The Battle of Britain is sometimes described as a draw. I think it was a victory. It was a victory in the sense that it prevented the Germans from doing what they wanted to do, namely invading Britain across the Channel.
Of course, Nazi Germany hadn't finished with Britain yet. The Battle of Britain was over, but now would come the Blitz, months of relentless nighttime bombing of British cities through the winter of 1940. By May of 1941, that had failed too. Hitler could wait no longer. He had a new target for his bombers and fighters, the Soviet Union. So in the spring of 1941, his great air armada left their French bases and flew east. The Blitz was over. But of course, the war itself was not. Final victory wouldn't come till 1945, but it would not have come at all had it not been for what the RAF achieved during their Hurricane and Spitfire summer of 1940.
In the scheme of the war, the Battle of Britain was a tiny engagement, but in terms of its historical significance, it is, I think, one of the crucial battles of the 20th century. What was at issue was whether or not Britain would stay in the war against Germany. If it had not been fought at all, or if it had been fought and lost, then there are only 2 possible outcomes of the Second World War. The Nazis would have invaded the Soviet Union anyway, and they might have won. One of the most awful scenarios that one can contemplate. The alternative is that the Soviet Union would have won, but it would have won by itself. And therefore, the whole of Europe, from the Urals to the Atlantic and down into the Mediterranean, would have come under Stalin's hold.
No wonder Churchill's rhetoric now took on near prophetic force.
Let us, therefore, brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
Churchill had persuaded an apprehensive country to put all its trust in the pilots of Fighter Command, and they had pulled it off.
If I was asked what was owed to the pilots who won the Battle of Britain, I would say all they've ever asked is to be remembered. And that's all. They don't want thanks, they just want you to remember that we won this battle. Not necessarily for you, it's for the country. And we're very proud that we did.
Dave's Battle of Britain training is now drawing to its climax. Peter Kinsey has been teaching him the classic repertoire of aerobatic skills, rolls, loops and half Cubans, to add to what he already knows about navigation and formation flying. In 1940, Dave's next home would have been an operational squadron, where, like those who went before him, he would have had to apply all he had learned to stay alive in one of the most ferocious air battles in history. There remains only one last thing for our trainee Spitfire Ace to do: a graduation display demonstrating his newfound skills. On the ground to watch him are his instructors, Brendan O'Brien and Carolyn Grace, as well as Battle of Britain pilot Pete Brothers.
Wonderful sound.
Very good. How's that? Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Should we do a loop?
Loop, okay. Loop it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So straight ahead?
Yeah, straight ahead will do just fine.
And 250 or 270?
270 again, yeah.
Okay, we've got enough time there.
That's good. Very good. Excellent. Fantastic.
Did you do victory rolls when you came back to your home base? It was frowned upon.
Initially.
Initially.
And then we stamped on it.
Why? Too many people were whistling in.
Yeah. And you could have had battle damage, which
Yes.
you didn't know about.
Yes. Cuban.
Dave's come a long way since he first climbed into a Tiger Moth. He has joined an exclusive club, pilots who have not only flown the Spitfire, but flown it close to its limits. He's been given a unique insight into at least one aspect of what training for the Battle of Britain would have been like.
Well, Pete, that was amazing, that. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. It's good fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
Nothing quite like it. Nothing quite like it.
Now it is time to meet someone who did it for real. Hurricane and Spitfire pilot Pete Brothers, who shot down 8 enemy aircraft during the summer of 1940.
You enjoyed it?
Yeah, like nothing else. It was unbelievable.
And now the crucial question. After 9 hours at the controls of a Spitfire, how would he cope with combat?
How do you think I would survive?
Yeah. If it was back there 50, 60 years ago.
I honestly think I'd fly the aircraft. It wouldn't be a problem.
You'd give it a good go.
I'd give it my very best shot. I think I'd do.
I think you would too.
Okay, it just, as long as he's 109, as long as nobody spotted me.
That's the one. Yeah, it's the one you don't.
Like all Battle of Britain pilots, Pete Brothers had a number of tricks of his own, designed to make himself harder to shoot down.
So I always flew with a bit of rudder trim on. So if I was jumped, I wasn't going when the chap fired ahead, deflection. I wasn't going there.
You wasn't.
I was pointing there, but I was actually going there.
So sort of slipping or skidding across the sky.
Yes. Just a little bit of trim, that's all.
Really?
Didn't affect your performance. The only thing, you took it off before you fired, otherwise you were pointing the
Yes,
wrong
in the wrong direction, yes.
But it meant that when you would jump, you didn't get hit, you'd see the stuff going past.
Excellent. Now that must be the best way to see it.
Dave's training is now over. He's had the same 9 hours training as many young Battle of Britain pilots received before having to fly into combat. But Carolyn's Spitfire has one last piece of history to make. For the first time in over half a century, Peat Brothers will once again take the controls of a World War II Spitfire. Just over 3,000 pilots are officially credited with having taken part in the Battle of Britain. Some, like Peat Brothers, survived and flew throughout the war. For others, combat lasted only days, or even hours.
You're flying my aeroplane. I'm greatly honoured, sir.
It feels just like they used to feel.
If there was one manoeuvre the Spitfire was born to fly, it is the victory roll.
So you have control.
I have control.
You have.
The Battle of Britain claimed nearly 3,000 Allied and German lives. Today, there are only a couple of hundred or so Battle of Britain pilots left alive. For all of them, Britain's finest hour was theirs too.
The Battle of Britain is really a story of sacrifice. Those who benefited were the countries of Western Europe. It was a unique case of one country espousing a greater cause, represented by this handful of young men, the few, as they're now known, who went up to defend their own skies but were actually defending something much greater at the time. It was, by any measure, not the meanest of acts among nations. This, I think, if anything of ours, is worth your memory.
I heard the Merlin start up, and I thought, I'm going to have a look at this, and they plummeted off. You know, it was just like a scramble, really. I was back 60 years, 70 years, yeah. Full of ghosts, those aeroplanes were, my old mates.
He said, you've had a rough time, haven't you? I said, no, I haven't had a rough time, a wonderful time. He said, your nerves are completely shot away.
They were the happiest days of my life. I'd do them all over again if I could, and do the same thing.
And then I had nightmares which have persisted the rest of my life. It's something you grew to live with. It's a kind of scar of honour, if you like.
We were faced with something and we did our best and we won.